The High Republic, A Golden Age of the Force. Chapter 1. A Galaxy in Golden Light. There was a time when the stars shone with promise, the High Republic. This was a period unlike any other, marked by hope, unity, and expansion. The Galactic Republic stood as a thriving civilization, and the Jedi Order served not as soldiers, but as stewards of peace. It was an age of optimism, where knowledge and compassion were the cornerstones of galactic policy. The High Republic era began approximately 200 years before the events of the Phantom Menace. To many across the galaxy, it was a golden age. The Republic was strong, well-organized, and filled with purpose. Its citizens believed in a better future, and the central government sought to make that belief a reality. At the heart of this dream was Chancellor Lina So, a leader renowned for her wisdom and vision. Her guiding philosophy was simple but profound. We are all the Republic. These words were echoed in Senate halls, Jedi temples, and outposts at the edge of known space. Lina So's administration launched a series of projects known collectively as the Great Works. These initiatives aimed to bring infrastructure, education, and stability to the most remote corners of the galaxy. Among them was the Starlight Beacon, a massive space station built in the Outer Rim. The beacon served many roles. It was a communications hub, a medical facility, a Jedi temple, and a symbol of the Republic's reach and compassion. More than just a structure, it was a promise to the galaxy's forgotten and frontier worlds that they mattered. The Outer Rim was vast and largely unexplored. Many of its systems had not yet been charted or properly connected to hyperspace lanes. Travel was difficult, and the dangers of piracy, isolation, and local conflicts were ever present. These regions had grown used to fending for themselves, often suspicious of core world involvement. The Republic, under So's leadership, sought to change that. Instead of dominance, they offered partnership. Instead of control, they brought support. Central to this effort were the Jedi. In this era, the Jedi Order was not bound to the rigidity seen in later centuries. Their understanding of the Force was deeper, more personal, and more varied. While some Jedi remained at the Great Temple on Coruscant, others became wayseekers, traveling where the Force called them without direct orders. The Jedi served as diplomats, mediators, explorers, and protectors. They were respected not just for their power, but for their wisdom, restraint, and empathy. Avar Kriss, Elzar Mann, Stellan Gios, and Keeve Trennis were among the Order's brightest. Each approached the Force in their own way. Avar heard it as music, a grand symphony in which all life was a note. Elzar experimented with the Force, seeking new ways to understand it. Stellan represented the traditional Jedi ideal, calm and composed. Keeve, once a hesitant Padawan, grew quickly into a powerful knight. Their differences were celebrated. The Jedi of the High Republic valued individuality within unity, seeing diversity of thought as a strength. Culturally, the galaxy flourished. Art, literature, music, and philosophy were in a state of renaissance. From the ivory towers of Alderaan to the floating archives of Jeddah, knowledge was shared freely. Holodramas captivated citizens from core to rim. New schools opened in remote systems, educating species who had long been overlooked. Even small communities preserved their own traditions through oral storytelling, dances, and spiritual practices, now protected rather than ignored by Republic policy. Trade expanded as well. Hyperdrive technology improved, allowing for faster and safer travel. Families like the Santekas mapped new hyperspace routes, connecting isolated worlds. These efforts helped integrate diverse planets into the Republic without erasing their identities. Markets bustled with goods from across the galaxy. Technological advances in medicine, agriculture, and energy brought quality-of-life improvements to even the most distant settlements. However, not all welcomed these changes. Some Outer Rim populations feared cultural erasure. Others resented the arrival of Jedi and Republic officials, no matter their intent. Pirates and criminal syndicates saw the Republic's expansion as a threat to their profits and autonomy. Tensions simmered beneath the surface. The galaxy was growing more interconnected, but unity did not come without friction. Despite these challenges, the High Republic remained committed to its ideals. The Senate worked closely with Jedi envoys and planetary governments to negotiate disputes and support regional development. While not perfect, the system functioned with surprising harmony. For a brief time, there was a genuine sense that progress was being made, not just for the few, but for the many. The Jedi, with their deep attunement to the Force, often sensed subtle shifts in the galaxy's balance. They knew that light must be protected, not assumed. Jedi Masters spoke frequently of vigilance, humility, and service. Even with no war on the horizon, the Order trained its members to act with discipline and insight. Each Jedi carried not only a lightsaber, but also the weight of responsibility. The heart of the Republic pulsed on Coruscant, a world city that never slept. From its Senate chambers to its academic halls, it represented the complexity and promise of galactic civilization. Yet the soul of the Republic lived in places like Starlight Beacon. It was there, in the distant reaches, that the dream was tested and made real. The High Republic's promise was not in its power, but in its purpose. It aimed to serve, not to rule. To uplift, not to exploit. It was an era defined by exploration, both outward into the stars and inward into the heart of the Force. The Republic and the Jedi were not perfect, but they aspired to be just, to be kind, and to bring light to the darkness. And yet, as always, the galaxy was full of unknowns. In the distant reaches of hyperspace, paths twisted and changed. In the shadows between stars, forces stirred, and within the hearts of beings across the galaxy, hope mingled with fear. The High Republic was a time of peace, of unity, and of brilliance. But history would show that even the brightest light can cast long shadows. This is the story of how it rose, how it faltered, and what it left behind. Chapter 2. The Jedi of the High Republic. In the golden light of the High Republic, the Jedi Order stood not as an army or enforcers of the state, but as trusted guides and guardians of peace. Their presence throughout the galaxy was seen as a comfort to most, a reminder that compassion, wisdom, and balance still mattered in an increasingly connected yet chaotic galaxy. They were monks, philosophers, explorers, mediators, and defenders. To truly understand the era, one must understand how the Jedi of the High Republic were unlike any that came before or after. At the heart of the Order stood the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, a vast and sacred structure that overlooked the political center of the Republic. The temple was not only a place of training and meditation, but also a repository of ancient knowledge. Holocrons containing thousands of years of teachings, histories, and philosophies were housed there, tended by Jedi scholars and archivists. Yet, unlike in later times, this temple was not the singular center of the Jedi's life. Smaller temples and enclaves dotted the galaxy, especially in regions where Jedi were stationed to aid local populations. One of the most notable aspects of the High Republic Jedi was their diversity of thought. The Order during this time did not enforce strict conformity in how Jedi interpreted or engaged with the Force. While all were trained in the code and the fundamental disciplines of the Order, individual Jedi were encouraged to develop personal connections to the Force. Chris, one of the most respected Jedi Masters of the era, perceived the Force as music, a great song flowing through all living things. To her, every being, every moment, added a new note to the symphony. Her style was one of harmony, of listening, and of leading others by finding their rhythm. By contrast, Elzarman approached the Force as a mystery to be uncovered. He was a seeker, constantly experimenting with new techniques and interpretations, always pushing the boundaries of what was known. While some masters viewed his methods as dangerous or impulsive, others admired his creativity and willingness to grow. His path reflected the Order's openness during this time, a willingness to learn and evolve, rather than stagnate in doctrine. Drengir, another master, represented the ideal of the balanced, steady Jedi Knight. Calm, collected, and deeply respectful of tradition, he served as a unifying figure among his peers. He had faith in the Republic, in the Order, and in the power of diplomacy. His presence brought stability during times of confusion and loss, and he often served as a voice of reason within the Jedi Council. Keeve Trennis, once a hesitant Padawan, rose quickly to prominence during the early conflicts of the era. Her journey illustrated the trials faced by younger Jedi in the Outer Rim. She struggled with self-doubt and the enormity of responsibility, but ultimately proved herself by acting with courage and heart. Her perspective as a newly minted knight provided an important contrast to the older generation, showing how the Jedi adapted and grew amid rising threats. Perhaps most legendary among the Order at this time was Master Yoda. Already ancient by this point, Yoda served not on the Council but as a wandering teacher. He traveled the galaxy with groups of Padawans, guiding them through direct experience rather than rigid lectures. His reputation as wise and powerful was already well earned. But during the High Republic, Yoda was still very much in motion, learning, teaching, and subtly shaping the next generation of Jedi. Not all Jedi followed the traditional path. Some chose the role of Wayseeker, a title given to Jedi who operated outside the usual structure of the Order. These individuals felt called by the Force to wander freely, unburdened by temple assignments or council orders. One such figure was Aula Jureni, a thoughtful and determined knight who believed the Force had a different purpose for her. Her journey took her into the darkest corners of the galaxy, where she acted as protector and guide to those far beyond the Republic's light. The Wayseekers symbolized a unique freedom within the Order, a recognition that the Force speaks differently to each Jedi. Culturally, the Jedi of this era wore ceremonial robes that reflected their personal tastes and regional influences. Armor, capes, braids, sashes, and insignias varied. While the lightsaber remained the universal symbol of their role, each was crafted uniquely, often incorporating elements from a Jedi's homeworld or personal history. These weapons were not only tools for defense, but also symbols of responsibility, not power. The Jedi Order maintained a close but cautious relationship with the Republic. Unlike later periods, when the Jedi would become heavily entwined with military command structures, the High Republic Jedi maintained a degree of separation. They served as neutral peacekeepers, not agents of political will. Jedi missions were coordinated through the Order, not directed by senators or politicians. This autonomy was vital to maintaining the Jedi's moral clarity and impartial judgment. Training within the Order was rigorous, but also adaptable. Younglings were educated in small clans and taught the principles of the Jedi Code. As they grew, Padawans were apprenticed to knights or masters, learning through personal mentorship and direct experience. Trials of courage, insight, skill, and spirit awaited those who sought knighthood. Unlike the more rigid structure of the late Republic era, masters in the High Republic had greater freedom to determine when their students were ready. The Jedi also served as explorers, charting unknown hyperspace lanes and making first contact with isolated cultures. Their deep sensitivity to life allowed them to navigate uncharted territories with caution and respect. In these roles, they often acted more like cultural emissaries than enforcers of law. Their goals were peace and understanding, not control. Despite their power, the Jedi faced unique vulnerabilities during this time. The galaxy was not at war, but it was not without danger. In the shadows, threats were rising that could not be solved with lightsabers or negotiation alone. The Jedi had to balance their ideals with growing signs that darkness was returning. Many among them began to question their place in the expanding galaxy. Were they truly guardians of peace, or had they become tools of an empire in disguise? Meditation chambers on distant outposts echoed with uncertainty. Visions of fire and destruction haunted some. Others felt the Force growing quieter, as if something unnatural were interfering. The Jedi, always sensitive to imbalance, could sense a disturbance looming beyond the veil of time, but they did not yet know its form. Still, The Order stood strong. They were not infallible, but they were dedicated. Their presence across the galaxy offered stability in a time of rapid change. In villages on distant moons, farmers would smile when a Jedi arrived. In city towers, diplomats welcomed their insight. In uncharted jungles, stranded travelers would light flares in hopes of being seen by a Jedi patrol ship. The Jedi were more than warriors. They were symbols of what the galaxy could be at its best. The High Republic Jedi remind us that strength lies not in dominance but in restraint, that wisdom grows not from power but from understanding, and that the Force is not just a weapon or a shield, but a living current that connects all beings. This was the Jedi Order before the Clone Wars, before the armor, before the war councils, before the temple fell. This was an order striving to embody its ideals, adapting to the galaxy, and walking the path of light. The next chapter in their journey would test that light in ways they could scarcely imagine. Chapter 3. A Fragile Peace. Beneath the shining optimism of the High Republic, cracks had already begun to form. Though the era was remembered as one of unity and progress, the peace it offered was not absolute. In truth, it was fragile, a delicate arrangement between hundreds of worlds, thousands of cultures, and billions of beings with their own hopes, fears, and agendas. At the heart of it all was the Galactic Republic, governed from Coruscant by the Senate and the Chancellor. But even this grand body struggled to maintain cohesion across the vast and complex galactic map. The Republic Senate during this era was a sprawling assembly of representatives from nearly every inhabited sector. Delegates came from core worlds, mid-rim systems, and even from remote outer rim territories. Though the Senate chamber was built in a circular configuration to suggest equality and openness, not all voices carried the same weight. Core worlds, which had long been settled and developed, enjoyed stronger economies, more advanced infrastructure, and closer ties to central power. Outer rim planets, often newly admitted or still developing, found themselves marginalized or misunderstood. Chancellor Lina Sol, determined to correct this imbalance, envisioned a republic that truly served all its members equally. Her Great Works initiative, introduced early in her chancellorship, aimed to bring the outer rim into the galactic fold, not through force, but through service. Schools, hospitals, communication relays, and spaceports were planned for regions that had long gone without. The Starlight Beacon, constructed at the edge of wildspace, became the crown jewel of this campaign. Yet So's vision was not universally embraced. Some senators, especially those representing wealthy core worlds, viewed the Great Works as an unnecessary drain on Republic resources. Others feared that extending too far too fast would destabilize the government. Behind the polished speeches and formal debates, political rivalries festered. Senators made alliances, brokered favors, and launched campaigns to secure influence. Power in the Republic was always shifting, and many used the ideals of the High Republic as tools for their own ambitions. At the same time, the cultural diversity of the galaxy presented both strength and struggle. Core worlds such as Coruscant, Chandrila, and Alderaan valued reason, structure, and high culture. These planets shaped the Republic's political tone, setting the expectations for governance, diplomacy, and economics. But mid-rim and outer-rim worlds often had different priorities. Survival, autonomy, and the preservation of local customs mattered more than conformity with Republic ideals. Some systems felt pride in joining the Republic, eager for trade opportunities and protection. Others were wary. Entire generations had grown up without any meaningful interaction with Coruscant. For them, the Jedi were myth, the Senate a distant rumor. When Republic ships suddenly appeared offering guidance and infrastructure, they were not always welcomed as saviors. Trust had to be earned, and in many cases it was not. One of the key challenges was communication. Despite advanced technology, real-time communication across vast distances remained difficult. The Starlight Beacon helped to solve this by acting as a relay hub, but even so, delays in messaging, policy enforcement, and decision-making often frustrated outer rim communities. Local governments frequently found themselves making decisions before Republic guidance could reach them. This fostered a sense of independence that clashed with the central government's hope for uniformity. In some cases, friction turned to open resistance. Planets such as Iram and Erinua, locked in a generations-old conflict, struggled to reconcile their own histories with Republic intervention. Though Republic diplomats and Jedi mediators attempted to broker peace, deep-rooted enmities and mistrust made lasting progress difficult. These localized conflicts served as reminders that the Republic's influence was not absolute, and that its ideals could not simply be projected into places where they had not grown naturally. The Jedi, too, felt the weight of this fragile peace. Though respected and often welcomed, they were not immune to the suspicion that followed Republic officials into independent systems. Some saw the Jedi as tools of the core worlds, extensions of Coruscant's reach. Others viewed them as aloof mystics, disconnected from the daily realities of frontier life. Jedi had to walk a fine line, balancing their role as peacekeepers with a need to remain impartial and sensitive to local customs. Among the Jedi themselves, there was debate over how much involvement was appropriate. Some, like Stellan Gios, believed that working closely with the Republic was essential to maintaining order. Others, like Orla Jeremy, believed the Jedi should be more distant, more flexible in following the Force rather than political agendas. The growing tensions within the Order reflected the wider strain across the galaxy. The Outer Rim, while often portrayed as underdeveloped, was in fact home to many rich and ancient cultures, from the spiritual traditions of the Togruta on Shili to the tribal governance of the Tholotheans. These civilizations had their own systems of justice, belief, and governance. While the Republic offered technology and resources, it often failed to fully understand or respect these traditions. In some cases, Jedi emissaries had to act as cultural interpreters, building bridges that senators and bureaucrats could not. Meanwhile, the galaxy's economy surged forward. New hyperspace routes opened trade between distant systems. Merchants, prospectors, and industrialists ventured into previously unreachable regions. Corporations such as the Taggi Company and the Colicoid Creation Nest saw massive profits in supplying frontier outposts. This economic boom brought prosperity, but also inequality. Many frontier worlds became dependent on Republic trade, while losing control over their own markets. Local industries were outcompeted, cultures commodified, and entire ecosystems exploited. Despite all this, the dream of the Republic remained powerful. Across the stars, children studied basic and learned about Coruscant's great spires. Farmers used Republic tools to bring water to dry fields. Doctors in small clinics operated with supplies delivered by Starlight medical ships. For millions, life had improved in meaningful ways. The promise of peace was not empty, it simply had to be defended. But peace, once taken for granted, requires constant maintenance. And not all threats came from within. Beyond the carefully charted systems, outside the safety of hyperspace lanes, danger brewed. Pirate gangs, warlords, and criminal syndicates took advantage of the galaxy's expansion. With Republic and Jedi resources stretched thin, entire sectors operated outside the law. Some of these factions, such as the Nihil, presented a new kind of threat, one that the Republic was not prepared to understand or confront. The Nihil were not interested in diplomacy. They rejected structure, unity, and peace. To them, the High Republic was a lie, a delusion of control. They moved unpredictably, striking from hidden locations using paths through hyperspace no one else could follow. Their attacks were brutal, chaotic, and devastating. The galaxy's golden light was about to face its first real shadow. The Republic believed it had reached a moment of triumph. It had extended its hand to forgotten worlds. It had built bridges across the void. It had lit beacons of hope in the dark, but it had done so quickly, perhaps too quickly, and without fully understanding the forces that lurked in the margins. This was a moment suspended in time, a fragile piece poised on the edge of change, and change was coming. Chapter 4. The Nile Storm. The greatest threats often emerge not from the center of power but from its margins. While the Republic expanded its reach into the Outer Rim with a mission of hope and unity, something far darker had taken root in the shadows beyond the hyperspace lanes. This was not an empire or a cult. It was not a rival government or a movement of ideology. It was a storm, chaotic, unpredictable, and fueled by fear. They called themselves the Nihil. To most in the core worlds, the Nihil were little more than whispers, stories of masked marauders and savage raids. But to those on the frontier, the threat was all too real. Entire colonies vanished. Convoys were ambushed in hyperspace. Rescue beacons went silent. What made the Nihil especially terrifying was their unpredictability. They struck without warning and disappeared just as quickly. No one knew where they would hit next. No one could track how they moved. And no one understood who was behind it all. The Nihil were not an organized military force in the traditional sense. They were more like a storm of raiders, spirits, mercenaries, and killers held together by a brutal and efficient system. At the top was a figure known as the Eye of the Nihil. Beneath him were the 3 Tempest runners, each commanding a division of fighters known as a Tempest. These Tempests operated independently, bound only by the Eye's direction and the rule of chaos. Within each Tempest there were clouds, storms, and strikes, titles given not to denote honor, but function and rank within the violent machine. Their appearance was just as fearsome as their tactics. Nihil warriors wore scavenged armor, fearsome masks, and intimidating cloaks that evoked images of death and disaster. Each fighter was encouraged to express themselves through their armor, turning it into a reflection of their brutality and madness. This visual terror was not accidental. The Nihil believed in instilling fear before a fight had even begun. Their motto was simple and chilling: "You can't take it with you, but we can." The true power of the Nihil, however, did not lie in their weapons or numbers. It lay in their ability to move through hyperspace in ways the Republic could not predict or understand. Hyperspace navigation was still a developing science, and while most governments relied on established lanes and prospectors like the Santeca family to chart new paths, the Nihil had something, or someone, different. Unknown to most, the Eye of the Nihil had access to a collection of secret hyperspace routes that allowed his forces to jump in and out of space with terrifying precision. These paths, known only to a select few within the Nihil leadership, gave them complete tactical superiority. Ships could vanish from one system and reappear in another without following known routes. The Republic's response was always too late, their pursuit paths always incorrect. The result was chaos, and chaos was exactly what the Nihil wanted. The man behind the mask of the Eye was Marchion Ro, a figure as enigmatic as he was dangerous. To the public, he was a myth. To the Tempest runners, he was a manipulative puppet master, and to himself, he was a visionary. Marchion Ro did not believe in order or peace. He believed the galaxy was too stagnant, too structured, and that true strength came from unleashing primal freedom. He wielded his knowledge of hyperspace as a weapon and used the Tempests as blunt instruments of terror. Yet hidden behind his cold mask and calculated moves was a much darker ambition, one he kept even from his most trusted allies. The Republic's first direct encounter with the Nihil came during a disaster that would shake the entire galaxy. The Hetzal Prime incident. A routine hyperspace shipping lane was suddenly compromised when the Legacy run, a large freighter, broke apart mid-transit. Massive fragments of the ship emerged from hyperspace at different points, threatening to devastate entire planetary systems. The Jedi, led by Avar Kriss, Elzar Mann and others, scrambled to respond. What they discovered was shocking. The debris was not simply a tragedy, but a sign of something deeply wrong with hyperspace itself. As the Jedi and Republic officials began investigating, they uncovered hints that the disaster had been no accident. The Nihil had manipulated hyperspace paths in secret, turning the galaxy's greatest tool into a weapon. The response was swift. The Republic publicly denounced the Nihil and began military operations to dismantle their known bases. Jedi were dispatched across the frontier to assist in hunting them down, but the Republic misunderstood the enemy. They believed the Nihil to be a scattered group of criminals. They did not yet realize they were facing a coordinated threat with vision, leadership, and strategy. In the chaos that followed, Marchion Ro began his rise from behind the scenes. He manipulated the internal politics of the Nihil, orchestrating the deaths of rivals and strengthening his control. He presented himself to the galaxy as a mere facilitator, letting his Tempest runners take the blame for the most horrific attacks. Meanwhile, he secured a stranglehold over the secret hyperspace paths, using a captured and enslaved member of the Santeca family, Mary Santeca, to map routes never seen before. This technology and the ruthlessness with which he wielded it gave him a level of power no pirate had ever known. The Nihil did not seek to conquer territory in the traditional sense. They wanted fear, instability, and destruction. They would loot a world, destroy its infrastructure, and vanish. Their presence alone was enough to paralyze regions. Trade routes collapsed, local governments fell into disarray. The Republic's efforts to expand into the Outer Rim were suddenly halted. The promise of safety vanished. For the first time in decades, the people began to question whether the Republic could truly protect them. The Jedi were stretched thin. Masters and Padawans found themselves caught in battles that tested not just their combat skills, but their values. The Nihil did not fight with honor. They used hostages, ambushes, and psychological tactics. They laced worlds with traps and destroyed sacred sites. The Jedi, raised to be peacekeepers, had to adjust to an enemy that thrived on chaos. For some, the struggle became internal. Was this the kind of battle they were meant to fight? Could they remain calm and centered in the face of such deliberate cruelty? Still, the Jedi were not without victories. The coordination of Avar Kriss during the Hetzal crisis saved millions of lives. On distant worlds, smaller Jedi outposts began coordinating defense strategies with local militias. The Starlight Beacon became a hub not just for communication, but for rallying hope. Stories of Jedi standing against impossible odds began to circulate, inspiring courage in populations that had nearly lost all faith. But Marchion Ro was always one step ahead. Each defeat for the Nihil was part of a larger plan. He allowed some Tempests to fall while consolidating power over others. He stoked the belief that the Nihil were being hunted to extinction, even as he moved deeper into uncharted regions of space. He studied the Jedi, learned their tactics, and prepared something far worse than any raid or ambush. The storm was only beginning. As the Republic braced itself for war and the Jedi tried to hold the line, few understood just how deep the Nihil's influence had already spread. In backroom deals, supply chains, and corrupted starports, the seeds of collapse were being sown. Peace had always been fragile. The Nihil were about to shatter it. And in the center of it all, masked and silent, Marchion Ro waited for the perfect moment to bring darkness to light. Chapter 5. Starlight falls, darkness rises. When the Republic built the Starlight Beacon, it did so with faith in the future. Floating at the edge of the Outer Rim, far from the comfort of the core worlds, the beacon was meant to symbolize hope, cooperation, and shared destiny. It housed a Jedi temple, medical centers, communication hubs, and cultural archives. It was a lighthouse in the stars, visible from hyperspace, its message clear: the Republic is here, and you are not alone. But even the brightest light can cast long shadows. In the years following the Hetzal Prime disaster, Starlight Beacon had become more than a diplomatic outpost. It was a fortress of unity in an era of increasing uncertainty. Jedi Masters, Republic officials, scientists, and citizens lived and worked side by side. It served as the command post for Outer Rim operations, coordinating aid, security, and education. Pilgrims came to it seeking guidance, worlds contacted it for help, children dreamed of seeing it with their own eyes. To the Jedi, it was a sacred space. Under the leadership of Jedi like Avar Kriss and Master Maru, it had become a center for cooperation across the Order. Jedi from many systems were assigned there on rotation. They meditated, trained, and engaged in peacekeeping across a wide span of frontier space. It was also a symbol of the Jedi's connection to the Republic. How the Order still worked as guardians rather than warriors, always focused on harmony. But to the Nihil, it was a target, not just for strategic value, but for what it represented. Marchion Ro had grown increasingly obsessed with striking the Republic at its heart. He understood that fear was more powerful than any weapon, and to destroy Starlight Beacon would be to destroy hope. In secret, Marchion Ro had begun consolidating his control over the Nihil. Many of the original Tempest runners had been eliminated or broken. He had established new chains of command and relocated key operations deep into unexplored space. Using forbidden technology and twisted science, he had secured a new weapon, something not mechanical but ancient, something that struck not at flesh, but at the soul. It was called the Leveler. Almost nothing was known about it, not even among the Nihil's own ranks. It was not a beast in the traditional sense. It had no metal claws or blasters, but it could kill Jedi in a way that defied explanation. When unleashed, the Leveler disrupted a Jedi's connection to the Force. Victims were not merely struck down, they were petrified, consumed by a deep, primal fear that erased their sense of identity. Where once stood powerful guardians of peace, only ashen husks remained. Marchion Ro had discovered the Leveler while scouring ancient texts and lost ruins. With it, he no longer needed brute force. He had found a way to bring the Jedi to their knees. The plan to destroy Starlight Beacon began in silence. Ro seeded agents among Republic supply routes and starports. Communications were subtly tampered with. Rescue missions were diverted. Nihil raiders attacked minor systems, drawing Jedi and Republic forces away from the beacon. While the galaxy's defenders chased ghosts, Ro's strike force assembled in the dark. The assault came in phases. First, power to the beacon's communication systems failed. Then, its orbital stabilizers began to malfunction. Massive energy surges knocked out essential systems. Fire broke out in the lower decks. Droids turned against their handlers. Supply bays ruptured. Entire wings of the station were lost to decompression. As the chaos spread, the Nihil attacked. Avar Kriss and the Jedi present responded with everything they had. They defended corridors, led evacuations, and coordinated with Republic engineers to stabilize critical systems. Padawans carried the wounded. Masters held back the attackers. Civilians hid behind blast doors while alarms screamed. Amid the smoke and flickering lights, the Jedi tried to hold the line. But the Leveler was already aboard. When it was unleashed, the effect was immediate. Jedi Masters fell without a sound, their bodies twisted, their eyes filled with terror. Force and sensitive beings collapsed, their minds shattered by something they could not comprehend. Even the most seasoned warriors froze in fear. The Force itself felt quiet, as if recoiling from the presence of something older and darker than any Sith. Marchion Ro did not fight with a lightsaber. He did not issue orders through shouted commands. He walked among the ruin, calm and calculating. His hatred for the Jedi was personal. It was generational. And now he stood over their greatest symbol, watching it burn. Despite everything, some fought back. Avar Kriss, driven by duty and courage, rallied the survivors. Jedi Knight Keeve Trennis and others joined her, navigating burning corridors and sabotaged machinery to reach trapped personnel. Republic security forces, vastly outnumbered, held choke points and escorted civilians to escape pods. Droids reset emergency protocols and carried out last-ditch repairs. But it was not enough. As the beacon's core destabilized, the station began to break apart. The artificial gravity failed, fires raged unchecked, airlocks malfunctioned. The great halls, once filled with light and song, echoed with silence and smoke. In its final moments, Starlight Beacon became a tomb for many, a grave marker for an age of optimism. The destruction of the beacon sent shockwaves across the galaxy. Entire sectors went dark, supply lines crumbled, local systems, once hopeful, now felt abandoned. The Republic reeled. In the Senate, accusations flew. Some blamed Chancellor So, others blamed the Jedi. Public confidence collapsed. The very project that had symbolized peace had become a symbol of defeat. Within the Jedi Order, grief took root. Many had lost friends, students, or mentors. The deaths caused by the Leveler could not be explained. Even the most powerful masters could not sense what had happened. Visions were clouded. Meditation brought no clarity. For the first time in centuries, the Jedi felt blind. The loss also exposed vulnerabilities within the Order. Some began questioning the wisdom of remaining so close to the Republic's politics. Others demanded stronger measures to counter the Nihil threat. Debates turned into divisions. The Council tried to project calm, but the fractures were growing. Trust, once the foundation of the Jedi way, had begun to erode. For the Republic, the fall of the beacon marked the end of innocence. Chancellor Lina So, devastated by the loss, tried to rally the Senate, but her health and influence were fading. Her vision for the galaxy had been one of light, but the darkness had arrived. Politicians who once praised unity now argued for militarization. The spirit of cooperation gave way to fear and suspicion. Marchion Ro, hidden far from Coruscant, watched it all unfold. He had achieved what he set out to do, not just to kill Jedi, but to fracture the Republic's soul. With the Leveler, he now had the power to strike at the heart of the Force itself. The Jedi would no longer be feared or respected. They would be doubted, and in that doubt, chaos would grow. Starlight Beacon had been the Republic's shining symbol, its promise to the Outer Rim. Now, it was gone. The frontier stood unguarded. The people it was meant to protect felt more alone than ever. And those who had once looked to the stars with hope now looked with fear. The light had faltered, the storm had come, and the High Republic would never be the same. Chapter 6. The Drengir Awaken. While the Jedi and the Republic focused their efforts on confronting the growing threat of the Nihil, a far older and more insidious danger was beginning to stir in the forgotten corners of the galaxy. It was not born of war, politics, or ambition, but of hunger. Ancient, endless, and corrupting. Buried beneath long-forgotten ruins, slumbering in darkness sealed by Jedi long ago, the Drengir began to awaken. The Drengir were not like the Nihil. They were not a people, a movement, or an ideology. They were a species. Sentient, plant-like beings rooted in the dark side of the Force, towering, twisted, and writhing with vines, tentacles, and thorn-covered limbs. They spoke in a language that felt more like a sensation than sound. Their thoughts pulsed across the Force as instinctual hunger. They did not desire power or conquest, they wanted to feed. Their existence had once been known to the Jedi. In ancient times, the Order had encountered the Drengir during exploratory missions into the unknown regions. Realizing the magnitude of the threat, Jedi Masters had joined with a powerful Force cult, the ancient guardians of the Dark Temple on the planet of the Maxine Station, to imprison the Drengir in deep stasis, binding them with rituals etched into the stone and sealed with the light. Over time, the threat faded into legend. The prison was forgotten, and the galaxy moved on. But in their relentless expansion, the Nihil had unknowingly disturbed the Drengir's prison. Searching for old technologies and hidden bases in the ruins of the Maxine Station, they shattered the balance of the seal. The Drengir began to stir, sensing prey once more. The bindings cracked, the hunger returned. The first encounters were small and isolated. Jedi stationed on outer colonies received reports of strange plant growths, of livestock vanishing, of villagers going missing. When investigated, they found tangled roots strangling buildings, vines pulsing with unnatural energy, and beings consumed by rot from within. Those who survived these early encounters spoke of voices whispering through the soil, of hallucinations and fear, of an overwhelming sense of being watched. One of the first Jedi to confront the Drengir directly was Keeve Trennis. Investigating disappearances on the agricultural world of Sedri Minor, she and her master Skier discovered that the crops had become tainted. The farmers had unknowingly cultivated Drengir spores, which grew into monstrous forms and attacked without warning. During the confrontation, Master Skier was infected, mentally linked to the Drengir's hive consciousness. Though he would later regain control of himself, the connection gave the Jedi their first glimpse into the true nature of the enemy. The Drengir did not speak of domination. They spoke of the great progenitor, the cycle of consumption, and the rot. They viewed all flesh as food, and all Jedi as barriers to their feast. In their minds, the galaxy was a garden, and they were its rightful tenders. Life was meant to be consumed, broken down, and returned to the soil. Their connection to the dark side made them especially dangerous to Force sensitives. They could corrupt the thoughts of the weak-willed, bend creatures to their will, and feed on the life energy of those who fought them. Even the Jedi's most powerful techniques struggled against the Drengir. Lightsabers could sever limbs, but the creatures regenerated rapidly. Fire could burn them, but their spores scattered through the air, infecting new hosts. The Force offered insight, but the Drengir's presence in it was slippery. More instinct than thought, more infection than identity. They were difficult to track and harder to predict. The spread was insidious. Infected individuals became agents of the Drengir, their minds overtaken by whispers and their bodies twisted with thorns and vines. These corrupted beings would lure others into the forests, sabotage defenses, or attack in the middle of the night. Entire communities vanished. In some cases, entire planets were compromised before the Republic realized what was happening. The Jedi Council, alarmed by the growing reports, dispatched masters to key sectors in hopes of containing the threat. On planets such as Mulita and Irum, great battles were fought. Jedi linked together through meditation to resist the psychic pressure of the hive mind. Agricultural colonies were evacuated, temples were sealed, entire forests were burned. The Drengir threat also began to intersect with the Republic's political problems. Many Outer Rim worlds, already skeptical of Republic involvement, now faced quarantine and forced evacuation orders. Supplies ran low, trust collapsed. In places where Jedi had once been greeted with joy, they were now met with suspicion. Some saw them as harbingers of the infection, others as failures who had let it spread. In the Senate, debate raged over how to respond. Some senators demanded full military engagement. Others questioned whether the Jedi had lost control of their own mission. Conspiracy theories flourished. News holos speculated on whether the Jedi were hiding something. Chancellor Lina So, already weakened by the loss of Starlight Beacon, struggled to maintain confidence in the Republic's leadership. Amid the chaos, the Jedi turned to the past. Ancient records were studied, forgotten texts were translated. Through these efforts, the Order began to understand the Drengir's origins and their connection to the dark side. They realized that traditional combat would not be enough. The Drengir were not just plants. They were the legacy of an older darkness, something that had learned to evolve and endure. To truly stop them, the Jedi would have to sever the source of their hive mind. On Nalor, an overgrown jungle world that had once been a thriving research colony, Jedi forces led by Avar Kriss confronted the great progenitor, the central mind from which the Drengir network drew its power. The battle was fierce. The progenitor's influence warped the jungle itself into a living weapon. Roots tore through the ground, trees collapsed, poison filled the air. Jedi formed protective circles, chanting and focusing the light as a barrier against the suffocating dark side. In a final, coordinated effort, Avar Kriss used her unique ability to perceive the Force as music to synchronize the Jedi in a harmonic chant that disrupted the progenitor's connection. As the psychic song reached its peak, the progenitor's body was destroyed, the hive mind fractured. Across the galaxy, Drengir growths shrieked and withered. The infection halted. But the victory came at great cost. Many Jedi were lost. Others were left deeply affected by the Drengir's presence in their minds. Worlds had been scarred, populations displaced. The Jedi, already weary from the Nihil, now bore the wounds of another invisible war. Yet even in defeat, the Drengir left a mark. Their existence reminded the galaxy of a deeper truth. The dark side does not sleep. It waits in hidden places, in old soil and broken ruins. It adapts, it endures. The Republic could offer law and the Jedi could offer guidance, but there were still things that defied both. In time, the Drengir would become another name in the long list of galactic threats. But for those who had seen them, who had felt their roots tighten around the soul, the memory never faded. And for the Jedi, still reeling from fear, loss, and doubt, one question grew louder with every passing day. What other ancient evils had they forgotten? Chapter 7. The Force in Balance. In the wake of Starlight Beacon's destruction and the Drengir's rampage, the Jedi Order found itself wounded not just physically, but spiritually. Their numbers had diminished, their failures weighed heavily on their minds. Yet beyond these losses, a deeper question began to trouble the Order. Were they truly in harmony with the Force, or had they begun to drift from its will? For centuries, the Jedi had operated under a shared understanding of balance. They believed in selflessness, serenity, and the denial of attachment. The High Republic Jedi, however, still retained space for individuality. Unlike the more rigid doctrines of later years, this generation of Jedi often expressed their connection to the Force in personal, even poetic ways. In doing so, they revealed the diversity and complexity of the Force itself. Avar Kriss was perhaps the most emblematic of this philosophy. To her, the Force was music, an endless, harmonious song that wove through every living thing. She heard its melodies in battle, during meditation, and when standing beneath starlight. This unique perception allowed her to coordinate Jedi efforts in combat with astonishing precision, attuning her fellow Jedi like instruments in an orchestra. It was through this vision that she helped break the Drengir hive mind. Yet even Avar, so in tune with harmony, found herself increasingly troubled. She began questioning whether her connection to the Force still resonated as clearly as it once had. Where there had once been melody, there was now static. Her close friend and fellow Jedi, Elzar Mann, struggled more visibly. Where Avar sought harmony, Elzar sought understanding. He believed the Force was always evolving and needed to be experienced in new ways. He meditated through invention and experimentation, often skirting the boundaries of Jedi orthodoxy. In one moment of despair, Elzar gave in to his emotions during a battle, using the Force in anger to destroy an enemy that threatened innocence. Though it saved lives, the act left him shaken. He had touched something dark and powerful, and he could not forget the sensation. That moment changed him. His dreams became haunted by visions of fire and ruin, of Jedi falling, of the galaxy in collapse. These visions were not isolated. Across the Order, Jedi began reporting disturbances in the Force, premonitions that did not fade, anxieties that would not ease. Meditation offered little comfort. The dark side did not roar but whispered. It bled into dreams, into the stillness of temples and the quiet of forests. The Jedi, trained to recognize imbalance, could feel it growing, but they did not know where it would lead. Others in the Order began to diverge. Jedi like Orla Jareni had long believed that the strict structures of the temple stifled the Force. She chose the path of the Wayseeker, traveling the galaxy without direction from the Council, trusting only in the Force's pull. Her journey took her into ancient ruins, long-lost Force cults, and distant, quiet corners of the galaxy untouched by politics or war. Through her, we see a side of the Jedi that valued adaptability, reflection, and the courage to break tradition when tradition no longer served truth. There was also Bel Zetifar, a young Jedi Knight who had lost his master Loden Greatstorm to the Nihil and the monstrous creature known as the Leveler. Loden had been one of the Order's most admired warriors, a powerful and compassionate figure who embodied Jedi ideals. But his death, his transformation into a petrified husk by an enemy that fed on the Force itself, shook the foundations of Bel's faith. He struggled to understand how the Force could allow such an end. His grief was not just personal, it reflected the pain of an entire generation of Jedi who now faced enemies immune to the very power they were sworn to wield. These personal crises mirrored a broader shift within the Order. For years, the Jedi had taken comfort in the clarity of their mission, to serve, to guide, and to protect. But the galaxy was changing, the Republic was faltering, trust in the Jedi was eroding. Even within the Order, debates arose. Should they remain impartial or act more decisively? Should they engage more closely with politics to preserve peace or step back to preserve their spiritual clarity? Despite these tensions, the Jedi still acted. On the forest world of Valo, they helped repel a brutal Nihil raid during the Republic Fair. On countless frontier settlements, they provided aid, protection, and guidance. They continued to train Padawans to explore new Force abilities and to search for ancient knowledge. But beneath their courage and wisdom, a question remained. Had they lost their balance? The Force, as they had always taught, was not a weapon. It was life. It flowed through everything, binding the galaxy in unseen threads. To wield it without arrogance required discipline. To trust it without question required humility. The High Republic Jedi, more than any that came after, embraced this complexity. They saw the Force not as an absolute, but as something living and nuanced, full of mystery and wonder, yet this very openness made them vulnerable. Marchion Ro understood this. He studied their traditions and learned their weaknesses. He did not need to overpower the Jedi, he only needed to break their confidence. Through the Leveler, he delivered not just death, but doubt. Jedi who survived its presence returned damaged, their connection to the Force dulled or broken, their insight clouded, their dreams corrupted. It was as though a storm had passed through their minds and left behind silence. In time, the Jedi would try to understand what the Leveler was. They would search for its origins, study its effects, and debate how to counter it. But for now, it remained a symbol of everything they feared. An enemy they could not sense, could not reason with, and could not stop. It represented the possibility that the Force, in all its depth, held terrors they had not prepared for. Still, there were moments of hope. Jedi across the galaxy continued to serve quietly, with compassion and strength. Masters mentored Padawans, peace was brokered between worlds. The Force still moved, even if not always clearly. In these small victories, the Jedi found purpose. They had not fallen, they had not surrendered to despair, they endured. But endurance is not balance. Balance means action tempered by wisdom, power guided by compassion, and purpose grounded in humility. The Jedi of the High Republic stood closer to that ideal than most. They had not yet become generals or soldiers. They still listened, they still learned, and perhaps that is what made their struggles so painful, because they knew what was being lost. They could feel the shift in the Force. Avar Kriss once described the Force as a song. Now that song was changing. The melody grew darker. The rhythm broke. Dissonance echoed in the hearts of Jedi across the stars. And the galaxy, listening without knowing it, began to change with them. Chapter 8. Republic Fractures. In the early years of the High Republic, the Galactic Senate stood tall as the governing body of an expansive, cooperative civilization. Senators from thousands of star systems debated policies, passed resolutions, and steered the destiny of trillions. The Senate Rotunda on Coruscant was a monument to diplomacy, a place where every voice, whether from the wealthiest core world or the most distant Outer Rim outpost, was supposed to be heard. At its helm, Chancellor Lina So led with vision, idealism, and unwavering belief in the promise of unity. But even the grandest institutions cannot escape pressure forever. As darkness crept in from the galaxy's edge, the very structure of the Republic began to bend. The cracks formed slowly at first, systems grew restless, trade routes became volatile, resources were stretched thin. Then came the fall of Starlight Beacon, and with it the illusion of unshakable peace. Chancellor So had once been hailed as a unifier. Her Great Works initiative brought prosperity and development to regions long neglected, but with the collapse of Starlight, public sentiment shifted rapidly. Confidence turned to blame. Senators questioned whether So had overreached. Some accused her of using the Outer Rim as a political experiment. Others whispered that she had failed to see the true threat of the Nihil until it was too late. As political momentum waned, the Chancellor found herself increasingly isolated. Her health began to decline. She withdrew from public appearances. Rumors swirled of power struggles behind closed doors. New factions emerged in the Senate, each pushing for control of the Republic's future. Some wanted aggressive militarization to counter the Nihil. Others demanded withdrawal from the Outer Rim entirely. A few more radical voices even proposed a restructuring of Republic governance, arguing that the Senate was no longer capable of protecting its citizens. At the center of this storm, the Jedi remained neutral, at least officially, but their presence itself became a source of tension. Once celebrated as symbols of peace, they were now seen by some as part of the problem. News coverage questioned their effectiveness. Political rivals accused them of withholding information, or worse, acting without oversight. Senators debated the role of the Jedi in Republic affairs. Should they answer directly to the Senate? Should their funding be reviewed? Were they truly servants of the Republic, or a private religious order operating above the law? These questions were not new, but in times of fear, they found fresh urgency. The Jedi themselves felt the strain. Some members of the Order began to withdraw from public life, focusing on meditation and internal study. Others leaned into action, advocating for greater involvement in political matters to help stabilize the galaxy. The Council struggled to maintain cohesion, caught between tradition and the reality of a galaxy in crisis. A few Jedi, particularly younger knights and Wayseekers, began to speak openly about the need for reform, both in the Jedi Order and in the way they engaged with the Republic. Outside the halls of Coruscant, the Republic's problems multiplied. Pirate activity surged. Entire sectors slipped into lawlessness. Worlds once aligned with the Republic now hesitated to renew their loyalty. Some sought protection from local militias or independent coalitions. Others turned to corporate interests or powerful noble houses. The idea of a singular galactic government, once considered a noble truth, now began to feel more like an overreach. Culturally, the divide between the core and the rim deepened. Core world citizens, used to the luxuries of organized government and consistent infrastructure, could not understand the hardships faced by frontier communities. They spoke of security, of preserving civilization. Outer Rim citizens spoke of abandonment, of being used and forgotten. This cultural dissonance bled into media, education, and commerce. Propaganda became common on both sides. The Republic's narrative of unity was no longer universal. Economic instability followed. Trade networks were disrupted by the Nihil. Major corporations raised prices, citing risk. Small economies collapsed. In the mid-rim, protests erupted over unfair tariffs and unequal resource distribution. On more distant planets, civil unrest turned to open rebellion. Some of these movements were inspired by real grievances. Others were manipulated by the Nihil, who understood that chaos did not have to be violent to be effective. A rumor, a shortage, or a lie could do more damage than a fleet of warships. All the while, Marchion Ro watched from the shadows. He understood that fear was his most powerful tool. By striking symbols of stability, like the Starlight Beacon, and sowing distrust, he could fracture the Republic without ever needing to conquer it. He had learned that systems fall from the inside. The Nihil's greatest victories were not battles, but disruptions. They turned allies against each other. They made the galaxy question what it had once believed. Within this context, the Jedi found themselves walking a knife's edge. To act too forcefully risked validating accusations of overreach. To act too timidly invited disaster. They were peacekeepers in a galaxy no longer at peace, and many of them felt the weight of every failure. Some Jedi began suffering from mental strain, unable to reconcile their ideals with their reality. Others turned inward, hoping to preserve what remained of the old ways, and a few began to question whether the Order still had a place in this fractured republic. Amid these growing fractures, new challenges continued to emerge. The Leveler, Marchion Ro's terrifying new weapon, remained largely unknown to the public. The Jedi kept its existence quiet, fearing the panic that knowledge would bring. But within their ranks, its effects were devastating. The loss of Master Loden Greatstorm, one of the Order's most respected voices, left a wound not easily healed. His death was not just tragic. It was unnatural. It defied the Force, and it left Jedi across the galaxy wondering if the very foundation of their understanding had begun to crumble. In Coruscant's highest towers, the Senate debated strategy. In frontier towns, citizens armed themselves. On distant moons, Jedi meditated in silence, hoping for clarity. The Republic had not yet fallen, but the illusion of its invincibility was shattered. It no longer felt like a united body. It felt like a mosaic, still beautiful, but full of cracks. And into those cracks, darkness crept. Still, even in uncertainty, some held on to hope. New senators rose with fresh ideas. Some systems reaffirmed their loyalty. Young Jedi, undeterred by the growing fear, continued to train. The Starlight Beacon might have fallen, but the light it represented had not yet been extinguished. There were still those willing to fight, not with hatred, but with resolve, not to dominate, but to serve. The Republic had reached a crossroads. The decisions made in these fragile moments would shape the galaxy for centuries. Would fear win? Would unity collapse into factionalism? Or would a new vision rise from the ashes of the old? No one knew the answer. Not the Jedi, not the senators, not even the Chancellor. But one thing was clear. The High Republic, once a symbol of peace, prosperity, and progress, now stood divided, and the storm, far from fading, was only gathering strength. Chapter 9. Marchion Ro's Gambit. Marchion Ro had never seen himself as a mere pirate lord or figurehead. He was not interested in plunder for its own sake, nor satisfied with leading a gang of raiders. He considered himself an architect, one who would reshape the galaxy through chaos. Where the Republic offered order, he saw stagnation. Where the Jedi promised peace, he saw blindness. From the beginning, Marchion Ro had positioned himself not as the Nihil's leader, but as its spy. Everything he had built, every lie he told, every move he made, served a deeper purpose. And now, with the Republic fractured and the Jedi reeling, his true gambit began. Ro's mastery was in control. While the Tempest runners of the Nihil squabbled over spoils and territory, Ro controlled the paths, the mysterious and secret hyperspace routes that allowed the Nihil to appear and vanish unpredictably. These routes were the source of their power, and he guarded them jealously. Most did not know where they came from, only that Ro distributed them at will. In truth, he kept a single living source imprisoned within his flagship, the elderly and frail Mare Santeca. Mare Santeca had once been part of a noble family famous for pioneering hyperspace routes. But through manipulation, genetic engineering, and forceful isolation, Ro's ancestors had turned her into a tool. Her mind, ravaged by time and tampering, still possessed a near supernatural ability to chart safe passages through unstable regions of space. Kept alive in a floating stasis chamber, her broken murmurs and fragmented visions provided Ro with maps that no other being could replicate. From these maps, he could guide the Nihil through paths that no Republic scout or Jedi could anticipate. It was this knowledge that had allowed Ro to orchestrate the fall of Starlight Beacon, and it was this same tool he now used to prepare the next phase, consolidating power through calculated unpredictability. But Marchion Ro was not content with outmaneuvering his enemies. He sought to break them. To accomplish this, he turned to the darkest of weapons, the Leveler. Unearthed from ancient forgotten ruins on a remote world known as the Graveyard, the Leveler was a creature unlike anything seen before. It was not mechanical nor technological, but biological. Something primal, ancient, and deeply attuned to the dark undercurrents of the Force. It did not roar, did not blast, and did not bleed. It unmade. When released, the Leveler struck at a Jedi's very connection to the Force. It caused hallucinations, disorientation, and finally petrification, leaving its victims frozen in terror, reduced to lifeless husks. No known Jedi technique could resist it. Not meditation, not shielding, not even the most powerful Force abilities. What terrified the Jedi most was not just the death it caused, but the nature of that death. It was as though the Force itself abandoned them. Ro did not use the Leveler casually. He chose his moments with care. He sent it against Loden Greatstorm, one of the most revered Jedi Masters, and watched as the proud warrior was reduced to dust. He unleashed it aboard Starlight Beacon during its collapse, feeding on the panic and horror of the Jedi defenders. And each time it struck, fear grew, not just among the Jedi, but among those who had always trusted them. The Jedi did not publicize the Leveler's existence. Instead, they began a secret investigation, deploying small teams to hunt down clues about its origin. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. Ancient murals and glyphs spoke of creatures that consumed light. Lost temples hinted at a time when even the most powerful Force wielders feared what lay buried in the dark. The Leveler was not new. It was old, older than the Republic itself, forgotten perhaps, but never destroyed. Ro understood the symbolism of his actions. He was not merely killing Jedi, he was eroding their myth. In his eyes, the Jedi had built their reputation on invincibility. They were seen as wise, untouchable guardians. But what happens when the untouchable are touched? What happens when the protectors cannot protect themselves? Within the Nihil, Ro's control deepened. He dismantled the older hierarchy, reshaping the Tempest to answer directly to him. He weeded out dissenters, executed rivals, and replaced chaos with a new kind of order, one ruled by fear. The Nihil were no longer a mob. They were an army of loyalists, zealots, and mercenaries bound by Ro's vision. Some followed him out of fear, others out of belief. All served his design. Publicly, Ro remained hidden. The Republic knew the Nihil were coordinated, but they did not know the full extent of Ro's manipulation. He allowed his lieutenants to be captured. He sacrificed entire Tempest fleets in skirmishes, all to preserve the illusion that the Nihil were fragmented. Meanwhile, he pulled strings behind the scenes, directing supply shortages, sabotaging peace talks, and spreading misinformation through black market channels and corrupted planetary leaders. His gambit reached beyond destruction. He wanted transformation. In one chilling communication, leaked to the Republic by an anonymous informant, Ro stated simply, "Let them choke on their unity." It became clear that his goal was not just to kill Jedi or tear down the Republic. He wanted to unravel the entire idea that civilization could be built on trust, reason, and peace. The Jedi, sensing the scale of the threat, began to shift their posture. Small detachments were formed to investigate Ro's origin, trace the ancient history of the Leveler, and discover how to counter it. Meanwhile, the Council debated whether to remain distant from politics or involve themselves more directly. Some argued that they were already at war, others feared that in becoming warriors, they would lose what made them Jedi. In the Senate, panic spread. Systems began to withhold resources from Republic fleets. Defense contracts were withdrawn, emergency powers were debated, senators from Outer Rim sectors demanded more protection, while core world representatives argued for tighter border controls. All the while, Marchion Ro remained unseen, watching the cracks widen from afar. But Ro's greatest act of manipulation was still to come. Using the stolen hyperspace paths and the fear seeded by the Leveler, he planned to strike Coruscant itself, not with bombs or fleets, but with confusion. He would destabilize its economy, disrupt communications, and unleash fear where it would spread the fastest, the galactic capital. Through corruption, false broadcasts, and hidden sabotage, he aimed to make the core doubt its own safety. Whether or not he would succeed in this final act was uncertain, but by now he had already won something more valuable than a battle. He had made the Republic question itself. He had made the Jedi uncertain of the Force, and he had made the galaxy afraid of the dark again. Chapter 10. Echoes of the High Republic. The Golden Age had ended, not with a single dramatic collapse, but with a slow and grinding erosion. The High Republic, once defined by unity, exploration, and boundless optimism, left behind echoes. Traces of light, scattered through a galaxy now dimmed by fear and doubt. The great dream of a peaceful, expansive civilization had faltered. But its story and its legacy continued. In the years that followed Marchion Ro's rise and the Republic's unraveling in the Outer Rim, the galaxy began to reshape itself. Trust in central authority withered. Worlds that once welcomed the Republic's aid withdrew behind planetary borders. Trade routes were closed. Former allies became rivals. Regional governments rose in defiance of Coruscant's reach. Some sought independence. Others turned to corporate power, criminal syndicates, or militarized protection. The vision of a united galaxy had splintered. The Jedi Order emerged from the High Republic, wounded in both spirit and stature. The deaths of beloved masters, the terror inflicted by the Leveler, and the failure to prevent the fall of Starlight Beacon left scars that could not easily be healed. The Order withdrew from many of its far-reaching posts. Jedi presence in the Outer Rim faded. Way-seeking, once a symbol of philosophical freedom, became less common. In its place, stricter structures were established. Rules were reinforced. Emotions were scrutinized. Attachments were discouraged with greater urgency. This internal tightening of doctrine would later be seen as the beginning of the Jedi's long drift toward rigidity. The trauma of the High Republic era shaped their choices. In an effort to prevent further chaos, the Jedi built walls around themselves, metaphorical and literal. By the time of the Clone Wars, the Jedi had become generals, often indistinguishable from the institutions they once served only in spirit. But during the High Republic, they had been something more. They had been explorers, poets, diplomats, seekers of truth. Some Jedi attempted to preserve that spirit. Aval Kriss continued her efforts to restore light to the frontier. Elzar Mann sought healing and understanding even as he battled his inner darkness. Bel Zetifar carried the memory of his master as a guiding flame. And among them, others, many never named in grand histories, continued to help where they could, visiting forgotten systems, rebuilding temples, and teaching new generations to listen to the Force. Not all who walked with the Jedi stayed. Some turned away, disillusioned by the failures they witnessed. Others faded into obscurity. A few, having touched the dark and survived, walked a narrow path between light and shadow. These quiet exiles carried wisdom that the galaxy would rediscover only in its darkest hours. In the Republic, power shifted. Chancellors came and went. New factions rose in the Senate. Fear of the Nihil and of the Jedi's apparent vulnerability led to the formation of new security forces and the expansion of surveillance measures. The political machine adapted, always changing to preserve itself. But something essential had been lost. The vision that had once inspired worlds to look up to the stars with hope. Starlight Beacon, destroyed but not forgotten, became a symbol of both ambition and loss. Memorials were built, songs were written, children learned of it in school, its story reduced to timelines and data entries. Yet the deeper meaning of what it had once stood for faded in the minds of many. The beacon's fall marked more than a battle. It marked the moment the Republic realized that light must be defended, not assumed. The Nihil, after Ro's campaign of terror, eventually fractured. Without the control of his vision, the Tempests fell into infighting. Many were destroyed by Jedi counterattacks or turned on one another for resources. But the damage had already been done. Ro's plan had succeeded, not by enduring, but by reshaping the environment in which his enemies lived. He had not needed to survive, only to infect the galaxy with fear. Of Marchion Ro himself, legends would persist. Some said he was killed in the final Jedi incursions. Others claimed he disappeared into the unknown regions. A few whispered that he had passed on the secret of the Leveler to someone far worse. No definitive account would ever surface, but in the centuries to come, Ro would become a myth, a warning, a ghostly reminder that beneath order, chaos always waits. Yet, despite all of this, the High Republic left behind more than ashes. It left behind ideas. The notion that the galaxy could be united through compassion and cooperation, the belief that Jedi could be more than warriors, the understanding that exploration was not about domination, but connection. These ideas survived in hidden temples, in the teachings of wandering Jedi, and in the quiet resilience of communities that had once been touched by the light. Many of the worlds reached by the Republic during this era retained what they had gained. Medical knowledge, infrastructure, and education systems endured even after Republic ships stopped coming. People remembered the Jedi who had helped them, the senators who had listened, and the ideals that had brought hope. In time, these memories would seed new movements, new alliances, and eventually new resistance against tyranny. Centuries later, when the galaxy would again find itself in the grip of fear, under the rule of a dark empire born from the very failures sown during the Republic's decline, it would be the memory of the High Republic that inspired rebellion. In the ruins of the Jedi Temple, old manuscripts from the era would be rediscovered. In the minds of Jedi survivors like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, echoes of a brighter time would remain. Even Luke Skywalker, raised on a desert world far from Coruscant's towers, would come to embody some of the freedom and hope that once defined the Jedi of the High Republic. The era's legacy was not one of perfection but of pursuit, a pursuit of light, knowledge, and balance. Its end was not the fault of one person or one group. It was a tragedy born of complacency, ambition, fear, and forgotten truths. But within that fall was also a message, one the galaxy continues to learn again and again. That peace is not a destination, it is a practice. That light must be tended like a flame, not taken for granted. And that even in the darkest night, echoes of the High Republic still sing among the stars.